Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Midweek Bible Study online edition. This one is scheduled to land on our Facebook page Wednesday evening, May 11th at 6 o'clock. I had to calculate that real quickly. Wednesday evening, May 11th at 6 o'clock. It's a continuing study of the Gospel of Matthew. We'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. I wanted to go over some usual business in case anybody is new coming on board. First of all, this is one of two ways that we make the Midweek Bible Study available. This online version is on our Facebook page first on Wednesday evenings at 6, then shows up on our YouTube page a little bit later. Then we have an in-person version of our Midweek Bible Study. That's in the sanctuary, also at 6 p.m. on Wednesday evening. So two different paths to be able to take. We're keeping the material pretty close. We've gotten a little out of sync over the last few weeks with our online versus in-person because the formats are a little bit different. In-person is a little bit more discussion, some questions, a lot of talk, cross-talk with everybody in the room together. And of course, this version is just me talking to you as we go forward. So they get a little bit off sync, but they're pretty close to the same material. We're about midway through the Gospel of Matthew right now, and that's the way we make the Midweek Bible Study available. We do the same sort of thing with Sunday morning worship. First of all, we have in-person worship at 9:30 at Sunny Level on Sunday morning, 11 o'clock at Duncan Memorial, and then the 11 o'clock Duncan service is also streamed live as it happens on our Facebook page and then shows up a little bit later on our YouTube page. Now, for both of those social media accounts, you can find the links to those at duncanumc.org, duncanumc.org. You go there, scroll down just a little bit, and there are great big giant buttons for our social media pages. It'll take you right to it. You get all the stuff that's on our Facebook page, so you can follow and then be plugged into that. Or if you're not on Facebook, we make that YouTube page available. And when you get there, you got the whole inventory of videos that we've done over the last 2.5 years or so. Sunday morning, Wednesday evenings, all the other special services, anything else that we've done videos for, those are available. So duncanumc.org. It's a great place to start, great place for anybody new to start. So you can invite somebody to just check that out. You find out what we're about, find those links to the social media pages, and be able to plug in and become a part of what we're doing in the congregation. Speaking of being a part, twice a week, generally speaking, twice a week on Tuesday and Friday afternoons or early evening, if you are part of our email list, you'll receive a congregational email. That'll include devotional material. It'll have announcements, things that are going on, and it'll have a prayer list. So all that information is available to you a couple times a week, usually not much more than that. If we have something really pressing or urgent, a prayer request or an announcement that really needs to be made in between those, we'll go ahead and push that out. But not going to spam your email box at all. It's not going to be emails all the time. It's just usually those 2 a week and then anything urgent in between. If you want to be a part of that, let me know about it. Call me, text me, email me. You can email directly from the web page as well. There's a link there to contact us and an email to let me know if you want to be a part of our congregational email list. Great way to get connected and stay connected and know what's going on. So check that out. Invite somebody else to do the same, and you can be a part of what's going on. Everything that may be coming up, you can find out about that and stay informed with it. All right, so I think that's our business. Let's have a quick word of prayer, then we'll get to our study for this week. Gracious God, we are so thankful as always that we are able to get together in this way, that we're able to join at whatever time and be a part of this study and be a part of this group that's working our way through this particular gospel right now. And we pray for your enlightenment here, that your spirit would speak to us, that we would find direction, that we would be able to ask ourselves questions and find answers and move forward as your disciples. And as we do so, we ask for the strength and the help to be able to reach out to those who need you the most right now. Folks, that we can give a helping hand, an encouraging word, actions that will help uplift and help and bring along those who are most in need. We lift up those who are hurting right now, who may be mourning, who may be dealing with illness, who are taking care of relatives or families. We lift those up to you, asking for your strength and your healing and help. For those around the world that we hear of day in and day out who are under the heels of oppression and suffering violence and loss right now, God, we ask your help. And in all these cases, most of all, for each person in their moment of need to know that you are present to walk through them with it. That we may cause a lot of chaos and breakage in the world, but you are there to help redeem it, help us come through it, and help lift us up as we walk through and you join us there in the middle of our trouble. God, we lift all this up to you and we pray in the name of Christ. Amen. Okay, so Matthew chapter 11 is where we are right now. And if you were with us last time, the first part of this chapter had to do with some of the disciples of John the Baptist coming to talk to Jesus, making sure, hey, we want to just check in. You are the Messiah, right? And they exchange a little bit of coded information there at the beginning of the chapter, a little coded question, a little coded answer, so they can all be on the same page and know who Jesus is and what he's about and what he's up to, and be able to deliver the news back to John. We also got a little bit more of that apocalyptic sort of language that we talked about over the last couple of chapters, the idea of a people up against problems, spoken to often in sort of coded parable type language, and given the assurance that God is always with us and God will win in the end. And that's kind of the point. We've talked about this a couple of times to say that's kind of the point of apocalyptic sorts of language. We tend to think of apocalyptic things as, being end of the world type stuff, whether it's a epidemic or war or famine or whatever, and civilization breaks down, and there's all kinds of cool movies and TV shows and stuff about that kind of take that theme, and that's where our brains tend to go. But apocalyptic language at its heart is just a message for people who are in some kind of crisis, at some crisis point where they need to hear often a message crafted just so that they'll be able to hear it, so that the powers that be can't hear it, but they'll be able to know what you're talking about, and that it contains the message that God is with us and God will win. And that's the heart of apocalyptic language. And we find all through the Bible, Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation in particular, and then pieces that we've heard in Matthew's gospel. So we got just a little bit more of that, and talking about the idea here up to the midpoint of this chapter 11 of a group of people who are not listening to something that is right in front of their face. They got Jesus, they have the Messiah right in front of their face, and they're just not listening. They're too embedded in their procedures, their rules, their presuppositions about things, and they're not listening or noticing or acknowledging this new thing that God is doing by Jesus being among us, God with us, and bringing this new phase, this new covenant of God's action among people. All right, so we'll begin in verse 20. And it continues that thought of the people who are not listening, the people who are just refusing to pay attention, refusing to acknowledge what he is doing, what God is doing here. So in verse 20, chapter 11, then Jesus began to denounce the towns in which most of his miracles had been performed, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted to the heavens? No, you will go down to Hades. For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. Okay, so really harsh stuff. And basically what it's saying is, okay, Jesus is a Jew. He is working with this launch point of something new coming from the Jewish nation. That's where following Jesus, what comes to be known as Christianity begins. It begins in the Jewish community as sort of almost a subset, or we might call it almost a denomination within Judaism. The first few years of Christianity, it wasn't a separate religion. It was part of Judaism, and that's what Jesus begins here. And he's sort of lamenting the idea that the home team here, the ones who are closest to this, the ones who have known God lo these many centuries from Abraham up to this point, are the ones not paying attention. As I said, God is doing something new. God has taken this next phase, this next covenant in the actions that God is doing among the people. And the home crowd is the one not listening. Or if they are listening, they're not acknowledging what's going on. And so this is a really stark moment of condemnation for them. He mentions Bethsaida and Chorazin and Capernaum. Capernaum is Jesus' sort of home base throughout the Gospels. That's where he lives and works the most. In that northern Galilee region of Palestine, and he in working there has taken note and now called them out on the idea that you're the very ones that should be hearing this, and yet you're not. Meanwhile, places like Tyre, Sidon, Sodom, for goodness sakes, those are the places that, had they seen this, they would have paid attention. There is a feel of sort of a judgment going on here, that Capernaum not going to be exalted to heaven, going to descend to Hades in this judgment that you're just not getting it. The segments of the religious leaders who are often found in disagreement, argument, opposition with Jesus, they're the ones who are really hardcore, and they don't represent every Jewish person by any means. They're sort of a small group, but still they're a very vocal group, which is often the case. Some of the nastiest people you'll run across, even to our day, are the ones on the fringes, and they're the most vocal. They're the ones that you'll hear first. You won't hear. Oftentimes, you won't hear good, sensible people trying to learn and grow and do things together. You'll mostly hear from the people who are screaming at each other from the fringes, and that was no different then. But there are a lot of these religious leaders that, in this situation where Jesus is with them, the Father is revealing the Son among this group of chosen people, and they are so set in their understanding of things, the way that they want to do things, that they refuse to come along. And not only do they refuse to come along, they even refuse to acknowledge the possibility of who he is. They just dismiss this. And so he tells them, all those wicked Gentile people that you think are just so terrible, the ones that live in Tyre and Sidon and the ones that were from Sodom and all those, they would be more likely to accept this message than you are. So let's go to verse 25 and There's a little bit about the Father revealing the Son here. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these from the wise and learned and have revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, those last three verses there, 28 to 30, those are probably pretty familiar to us who have been in and around church environment for any amount of time, or especially if you've grown up in it. The idea of come to me, my burden is light, my yoke is easy. He uses the word yoke to describe his teaching form, his what Jesus sets forth as a group of teachings. That's called a yoke, and it's not particular to him. A yoke is a way of describing in that time and place a particular rabbi. If you followed some of the more famous ones at the time, there was a Rabbi Hillel, a Rabbi Shammai, who were probably the most famous and dominant schools of thought in rabbinical world. And for them and for anybody else, any rabbi who taught, their particular way of seeing the law, and remember, when we say the law, that is all of the Jewish teachings that begin in the books of Moses, from the time of Exodus and going into the Promised Land. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Okay, that along with Genesis are called the Torah, and that is the law. Okay, and from those books, from those 5 books, there's a set of teachings. There's the really big, gigantic, obvious ones like the 10 Commandments. And then there's a whole lot of other laws that are part of the Torah that are laid out in great detail. Religious rules, ceremonial rules, day-to-day life rules, the way we deal with each other rules, the way we take care of legal matters rules, the way we take care of things even like our actions and our food choices. Those are all part of the law. And so the rabbis over the years, the teachers of the law over the years, there were certain groups that formed that looked at the law in slightly different ways. Now, they were largely in agreement. This is sort of a generalized belief in what the law says and what it is trying to help us do as a special people. But the more particular you get in the discussion, the further down the rabbit hole you go in the discussion, the more particular it becomes to a specific teacher or rabbi. Okay, and those are called yokes. If you follow this teacher, you would be taking on his yoke, his teaching, and Jesus is one of these teachers, and he is saying, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And it goes back to something that we saw a chapter or two ago, and we're going to see in greater detail in chapter 12, that Jesus is very much respectful and observant of Jewish law, very much so. He said in earlier chapters, he didn't come here to get rid of the law, he came here to fulfill it. Okay, so how does he fulfill it? He fulfills it in the way that he approaches observing it, and it becomes more focused on the heart and the motivations. We talked about this a lot over the course of Matthew. It becomes very, very focused on the heart and motivations of the person observing the law. They're not just checking off lists. they are reflecting a changed heart. In the teaching of Jesus, it is a transformed heart, a heart transformed by God that leads us to act in these loving, just ways. These ways that observe the boundaries of God, but it comes from a different place than just here. It comes from a different place than just knowing these are the rules. I check them off. I behave accordingly. It is a person's mode of being. It is the way that they are. They become more and more attuned to this and act in a natural sort of way that yields justice and love and humility and all these things that Jesus talks about. So he is much more in that camp. Now, that's not to say that all the Pharisees or all the rabbis are just strictly about checking lists. I don't think they were. I think there were lots of them that were very much also focused on trying to change the heart and observing what God does inside us to transform us into people who are more in tune with the priorities of the kingdom. There are other rabbis that are teaching similar sorts of approaches to the law, but Jesus has obviously a different perspective in the way that he's teaching, and he has the added bonus of being God incarnate. He is there as the Messiah, as the Savior, as God among us. And so that is a completely different perspective that he brings into it, to say that, yes, we observe the law, but the rules always get filtered through compassion. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, to say that whenever a rule is in front of him and a need is in front of him, he will always act in a compassionate way. If it bends that rule, fine, because the overarching important thing there is to show compassion, to meet somebody's need, to meet a hurt, a shortcoming, a exclusion, any of these things that do not show true justice and love and humility. Then if your law is holding you to a place where you can't show justice and humility and love, you got to reevaluate that. And you can still be in line with the heart of God. You can still be in line with the priorities of the kingdom, but even more so if you approach it from a position of compassion and love and service and justice. Okay, so that's where Jesus is always coming from. And so when he invites people to take on his yoke, he is saying, and I think in direct response to some of the people who challenge him along the ways, who are often kind of list checkers, I think he is saying, my yoke comes from this place of compassion. And because of that, a heart that has been softened and transformed by God, this will be an easy thing for you to do. This will become almost like breathing for you. It's not a burden. It's not just something that you're doing out of perfunctory action or checking a list. It's something that comes up from inside you because God has changed you and helped you think in these ways, so that you want to be compassionate and seeking justice and loving others. And so this is a yoke from Jesus that includes all those things. And because it comes from the inside of a transformed heart, it's easy. It's not a burden. It's not a job. I had a friend who was very fond of the phrase, the got tos and the get tos in life. Okay, and think about that for a second. There are things that you've got to do, You know, I got to get up in the morning. I got to go to my job. I got to mow the yard. I've got to clean the house. I've got to whatever, right? Those are the things that you've got to do. Then there are the things that you get to do. You know, the things that we are privileged to do, the things that bring joy and we look forward to them. You know, I get to grow a beautiful garden. I get to make my family happy by making this special meal. I get to see the look on a friend's face when I've come to help them, or maybe give them a gift, or whatever. You see the difference there. There's got tos and there's get tos, and I think Jesus' yoke is coming from a get to kind of place. You know, when we get to that place where our heart is changed to the point that we look at these things that God makes a priority. And if we can look at those and say, oh yeah, I get to do that. Not, oh well, I guess I'm supposed to do this. I got to do that, right? It's you see the difference is get to. That's a different place that we come from. So he invites these folks to, in about 3 different movements here, come to him. All right. Pharisees might be saying, do this list. Jesus is saying, come to him. And coming to him means trusting in him. Now, I've seen what Jesus says. I've seen what he's teaching. I've seen who he is. And I'm going to trust him. Okay, I'm going to trust him for this. I'm going to put myself in his hands. You know, if you're burdened, if you're exhausted, if you're stressed out, if you're constantly worrying about, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that, I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to do that, I'm supposed to behave in this way. No, come to him. Trust in him that he can help transform the heart and get you to the place where you get to. Okay, so first, come. And then he says, take on my yoke. Take this, receive this. Now, because God doesn't make us do things. We are agents of free will. And unfortunately, we can choose to do badly. We can choose badly. We can choose well. And Jesus says, okay, choose well, take this. You know, come to me, trust me, and then take on this. Rather than a legalistic set of rules that stress you out and get heaped on your back, and it's just something heavier and heavier and heavier to carry, take this on. Take on this transformation. When you come to me, I'm going to help you. I'm going to work with you and transform you. So take on this yoke. Choose wisely in this way, right? Choose to take this on and then learn, right? And it's a process going forward from there. And it's the same sort of thing that we talk about when we talk about grace in our tradition. When we talk about how God reaches out to us with grace and asks us, you know, here's the offering. Do you want this? Do you want to be what you were created to be? Do you want God to change you? Okay, then take this. And when you take it, that's not going to be the end, because it's transformation. It's a process of changing. And so that's going to be something that will last from the moment you say yes through all the moments that you say yes for the rest of your life. It's a journey. It's a process. What we would call sanctifying grace, you know, making us more and more like Jesus each day. So come, trust in Jesus, take this yoke on you, because this yoke is about get-tos instead of got-tos, and then learn and go through that process going forward. That's what he's inviting people to do when he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So come, take, learn. Okay. All right. So let's move on to chapter 12. And here we're going to run into something that is a really, really spiky sort of contention between Jesus and some of, again, not all, but some of the religious leaders of his place and time. It has to do with the Sabbath. And this is not the only time this comes up in the gospel. If you read through the four gospels, you find many occasions where there is this conflict about the Sabbath. How do we treat the Sabbath? And what do we do on the Sabbath? All right, so let's rewind just for a minute or so here. A few minutes ago, we talked about how different people look at different parts of the law, first 5 books, the Old Testament, right? And the different ways of looking at that, the conversations, the questions, the, hey, what about this? Because people, given any sort of structure of rules, people will always, 100%, there will be somebody in the room. If you give a list of rules, there will be 100% somebody in the room who will at least be thinking, if not saying, hey, but what about this? And give you a situation. And so through the years, through the centuries, in looking at the law, looking at Torah, there's all these questions, all these, but what about? And to the credit of Jewish learners and scholars and teachers, they spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of ink trying to chase these things, trying to chase the what ifs and the questions and be real students about this, to say, well, that's a good question. We need to think about that a little bit. And I hope, I'm a fan of, in our present context, doing the same thing. In the Christian world, don't be afraid of questions. Don't be afraid of, but what about? We don't need to be afraid of that. Let's chase that. Let's see what it's about. But what had happened is, on this particular point, observing the Sabbath. Okay, if you remember in the 10 Commandments, it talks about keeping the Sabbath day holy. Okay, 7th day of the week is a holy spot. It's for worship, it's for rest, it's for time with those closest to us. Okay, so keeping the Sabbath holy. All right. From that rule, as we just talked about, through the years, there were a whole lot of, but what about? Okay, I'm supposed to rest on the Sabbath, but what about this thing? Is it okay to make a sandwich? Is it okay to start a fire? Is it okay to feed my livestock? All these questions. If we're supposed to rest because the Sabbath day is holy, what does it mean to rest? Because rest for one person may not feel like rest to another, and vice versa. Okay, so all of these questions came up, and as the rules got tickier and tickier and tickier, even the tiniest of things were considered working on the Sabbath, at least to some interpreters of the law, including these Pharisees who were talking to Jesus. The smallest thing sometimes was considered working on the Sabbath, or sometimes the most reasonable thing would be considered work and against the rules. Okay, so let's see how that unfolds here. We'll read this first section. It's going to be pretty big section, but we'll go ahead and read all the way down to verse 21. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." He answered, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. So let's just stop there. I was going to read a little bit further, but let's just stop there. Now, we may read that and say, they're walking through a grain field. It's on the Sabbath, day of rest, right? They're walking through this grain field, and his disciples reach out and they pinch some kernels of grain off the stalks and eat them because they're hungry. Well, we might think, well, whoa, what's the big deal here? What's the complaint, right? It would be considered working, okay? Because let's rewind to the specific question and answer sort of view on what does the law mean when it means to rest on the Sabbath. Plucking those heads off the wheat stalks would be harvesting. Crushing them in their fingers before they put them in their mouth, that would be threshing or preparing. So those two things, strictly speaking, to the ones who view this very strictly, those two things are considered work on the Sabbath. It is the Sabbath. They are harvesting, they are preparing, and that's against the rules. Okay, so you see, even though it seems really, really small and insignificant to us, maybe, this is a big deal to people who were very particular about this. Now, it's lawful to on the in your neighbor's field. If you're hungry, you can get a little bit to eat. That's okay. Deuteronomy says that's fine. But on the Sabbath, they say you can't do that. Okay, so Jesus has these counters that he reminds them of, and the way he casts it, it's really kind of funny, but it becomes very serious later. We'll see. But he prefaces his questions with, "Haven't you read what David did?" Right? Haven't you read in the law? When he says that, it's really insulting. Really super insulting to people who spend their lives, every day of their lives, meticulously reading, knowing, applying what they believe the law to be, what they believe the scripture to be, earnestly, meticulously trying to learn and apply this. Chances are, he says, haven't you read? Chances are, not only have they read, they've probably memorized it. Okay, they could verbatim tell you what that part of the scripture says. So Jesus phrases it in kind of a funny, insulting sort of way to say, "Haven't you read this?" And of course they have, is the answer. But he talks about where David and his people they come in and they eat bread from the temple that's only supposed to be eaten by the priests. But David wasn't condemned for it. He and his men, they'd been out on campaign. They're tired. They're hungry. That's the bread that's available. That's what they ate, and they weren't condemned for it. Okay, so there's this comparison. Now, if you didn't condemn David for that, eating this bread out of the temple, then why are you condemning me and my disciples for eating a few grains of wheat? Then he goes to the priests and the temple set up themselves that even on the Sabbath, the priests had to offer a given number of sacrifices. So they were really working. Now, it was religious, ritual, ceremonial sort of work, but they were literally working on the Sabbath, and they were not condemned for that. Their service, their work was actually in obedience to the law. And then in verse 7, he says, "If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." Okay, in verse 7 there, when he says, if you don't know what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, that comes from the prophet Hosea. Jesus has already quoted him a couple chapters back, but the Sabbath law, he is saying, was meant to mark the chosen people of Israel and their relationship to God. But there was also this element of mercy, compassion, right? And any law, any rule that butts heads with mercy or compassion, Jesus says you should reevaluate the way you're looking at that if you want to go with the legalism instead of the mercy and the compassion and the love. So from their perspective, from the perspective of the Pharisees, they are defending the law and saying, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, right? Jesus comes at it from a different perspective and cites the prophet Hosea to say, mercy is more important. Compassion is more important. Hey, we got hungry people here. We got hungry people. And is it really more important that you define work of pinching wheat off the stalk and crushing it? Is it really more important for you to define work and condemn it than it is for this person who is hungry to get something to eat? All right, so again, we're back to that default sort of position that Jesus always seems to come from. That compassion, mercy, always is the lens that you look at the law through. Okay, always look at the rules through the lens of mercy and compassion. And so this can't be condemned. Now he adds this part that's something more important is with you. All right, something greater than the temple is here. Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. So again, he asserts his identity again as part of his reasoning. But even in doing that, he's saying, okay, I'm the Son of Man. I am God incarnate here with you. And what I'm telling you is that things like what Hosea said, they're right. Compassion and mercy come before the legalism and the tickiness of your rules. So reevaluate your rules in light of compassion and mercy. And so we're going to have to pause because we're just about out of time for this session. But let's just leave with that question. All right, what are our rules that we fence out or fence in and say, this is the way Christians do it, right? This is what Christians believe, and this is what we do, right? We don't do that, right? Either we do this or we don't do this. And where do those things ever butt heads with mercy or compassion? Where do we find places where our rules come into conflict with showing love and grace and mercy and compassion to another human being? Because there is where we find a place where we need to reevaluate how we look at the rules, how we look at what you do or what you don't do, or what you accept or what you don't accept. We need to reevaluate that if it comes into conflict with these core principles of mercy and compassion and love. Because when he quotes Hosea there to say, God values mercy more than sacrifice. Okay, what sacrifice, that word sacrifice kind of is a stand-in for the rules, the structure, the way we do things. Okay, so God values mercy more than the structure and the rules. Yeah, the rules are there to guide us and they're valuable. And we should try to observe the rules. But do those rules come in conflict with mercy or compassion or love? And if they do, we want to reevaluate the way we're looking at the rules. Now, the rules haven't changed, but the way that we see them changes and alters, and it changes and alters in favor of showing mercy, compassion, and love. Bottom line. if we are excluding, if we're abusing, if we're not showing somebody love or compassion or mercy, we are not looking at the rules the right way. Bottom line. And that's, I think, very thorough, bottom line Jesus kind of stuff. I really do. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you with that for this session. We'll be back for our next session. That'll be Wednesday evening, the 18th of May. That'll be our next online session. Whenever you happen to be watching this, the next one's going to show up on our Facebook page on Wednesday night, the 18th. And I hope to see you there or here for that. In the meantime, we have worship opportunities in person at 9:30 Sunny Level, 11 o'clock Duncan this coming Sunday morning, and then the 11 o'clock service online as well. So hopefully I'll see you there too, in one of those ways, either in person or online. And until we meet again, hope that you will be blessed, and I hope that you will be a blessing. And I'll see you next time.